For decades, a common way to configure a Cisco router or a switch was to connect to that device, maybe via Telnet or Secure Shell preferably, and use the command line interface to enter some Cisco iOS commands. We could even use SNMP, the Simple Network Management Protocol, to do some configuration management. Although usually SNMP was used just for monitoring, it did have the ability to do some configuration, but growing in popularity today are network programmability tools, where we can programmatically configure a network, and we're going to consider in this video the first of these tools, which is really a protocol. It's Netconf, and that stands for the Network Configuration Protocol. And that's one way that we can use a program, maybe a Python program running on our machine, to do configuration on a device. And earlier in this module, we talked about the architecture of SDN, software-defined networking, and we said that when we're sending commands down to a device, like a router or switch, to do that final configuration, we refer to that as a southbound API or a southbound interface, or simply an SBI. Netconf falls under that category. It is a southbound interface, and it's currently defined by RFC 6241, which was published in 2011, and that RFC was a replacement for the original Netconf RFC that came out in 2006. But the one that came out in 2011, that's the one we're using today in our Cisco iOS XE devices. In fact, in this video, I'm going to be demonstrating Netconf for you on a Cisco CSR 1000V router running iOS XE. And the way Netconf is going to work is we're going to have a manager and an agent. The manager is going to be sending instructions to the agent, and those instructions are going to be using the Yang data models that we talked about earlier. You might recall earlier in this module, we took a look at the IETF interfaces Yang module. Well, that would be one of the Yang modules that we could use with Netconf. We could specify in that model what configuration we wanted to be applied to a router, and it would be formatted in XML, not JSON. We're going to see with RESTconf later on that we could format our data using either XML or JSON, but here with Netconf, please understand that it's just XML. And then this data is going to be transported via Netconf, which defines how this data is transmitted across the network, and it's going to use Secure Shell. And typically, it's not going to be using the normal Secure Shell port. It's going to be using port 830. And the instructions are not going to be using HTTP verbs like RESTconf uses. Instead, it's going to be using RPC operations, remote procedure call operations, such as getConfig or editConfig. Now let's go out to a CSR 1000V and take a look at Netconf in action. Here we're sitting on router R1, and it's a Cisco CSR 1000V. I've already got it configured for Secure Shell, and I've got a local account, a username of Kevin, and a password of Cisco, so I can log in remotely. And I do have this already enabled for Netconf with Yang support. But if I had not done that, let me show you the command we would use. Let's go into global configuration mode, and we would say netconf-yang. And then we can check the status of Netconf by saying show netconf-yang status, and we see that it is enabled. And in this example, we want to use Netconf to do just a basic configuration change to this router. If we take a look at the interface configurations, let's do a show run pipe to begin with interface. I'd like you to notice for Gigabit Ethernet 2, there is no description for the interface. What we want to accomplish with Netconf is to simply add a description to that interface. Let's go over to a fresh terminal window. We're sitting here on my desktop, and what we can do is Secure Shell into this CSR 1000V using port 830 and saying that we're wanting to run the Netconf process. Here's how we do that. I'll say SSH space -S, and I want to log in with the username of Kevin, and the IP address of the CSR 1000V is 172.16.200.200. I want to use port 830, and I want this to be a Netconf process. And after we connect, we'll give the password of Cisco. After we connect, it gives me its capabilities, and it scrolls on for quite some time. I won't scroll through all of this, but this is Netconf telling me its capabilities. Notice all the references to Yang, and we see feature after feature after feature of things that we could set using Yang. Now, it's interesting that I'm at this prompt. I'm not at the traditional # prompt that we would expect on a router. And I could, from here, start typing in commands in XML format. That's rarely done, though. We typically use some other utility to send our Yang data formatted in XML, and we might use a Python program to do that. And the utility that I've installed here on my Mac is NC Client. So I'm going to break out of this session back to my local Mac prompt, and I want to show you the Python program that we're going to be running that's going to set that description on that interface. Let's do a cat netconf.py, and I'll scroll up to the top. Notice that there is a section for connection parameters. This is the IP address of the router. I'm using port 830. Here's my username. Here's my password. It's going to use that information to connect to the device. It's going to retrieve the first 10 of the server capabilities, and it can then retrieve the running configuration for the interfaces. And notice it's using that IETF interfaces Yang module that we talked about earlier in the course. We're going to be using a remote procedure call of getConfig to go get that configuration. And then I want to modify my interface description, and we'll be using an editconfig RPC command to do that. But I want to add this description for Gigabit Ethernet 2 that says, configured via Netconf, Kevin Wallace training. And then it's going to verify its configuration change. So let's run that. I'm going to say Python 3 and then give the name of this file, which is netconf.py. It's connecting to the server. It pulls down the first 10 capabilities, and it said that it successfully applied the configuration. We'll verify that in a moment, but before we do, you might be asking, okay, how do I come up with this Python script? Well, there are various GitHub repositories where you can go get something similar to what you want and then modify it for your needs. But I would say for real-world applications today, I'm personally going to be using AI a lot to help me create these Python scripts. In fact, this Python script that we just ran, that was created with Claude AI, a chatbot. I told it what I wanted, and it created a Python script. Now, the first time, it did not work. It came back with an error message. Well, I simply copied and pasted the error message back into Claude saying, well, I ran it, and it gave me this error message, and it says, oh, okay, this is happening, and this is happening. It made about 4 or 5 changes, and it says, here is the corrected script, and it worked. That's what we were in just now. So AI can be a huge help in creating these Python scripts for us. Now let's go back to our CSR 1000V and confirm that we really did get that description applied to Gigabit Ethernet 2. Let's reissue the command showrun pipe to begin interface, and look at that. There is the description for Gigabit Ethernet 2. And this is an example of updating a Cisco IOS XE configuration, specifically on a CSR 1000V, using Netconf.